and we're having a lot of entrepreneurs take advantage of those tools. So it's an encouraging sign.
Terrific. So what do you want to know about companies' measurement or rating systems?
I'd like to ask a question probably to Marisa. I'm particularly interested in evolution of labor force issues.
Right.
I'm thinking about human capital, talent management, which happens inside the organization. It has to do with people who already have jobs and can they advance. You've also mentioned about supply chain, but just this gets us away from the environment and the outside, but I'm interested in just what you've done in that area.
Let us know who you are, I think.
Oh, I'm Jim Posner. I chair a small family foundation here in New York.
Great. This is a great question. So the research that we're doing is on an industry by industry basis, and that was definitely one of the issues that we found in a number of the healthcare industries, and also financials and technology. It's particularly important. Just talent retention and recruitment. So yeah, that's definitely come up as one of our sort of what we call, well, yeah, social issues, or really looking at human capital. And we look at 5 different capitals as we're doing our research, and human capital is one of those. So that's definitely a high priority.
I think we're over here.
Thanks. I'm Donna Katzen from Shared Interest. Question. There seems to be on the horizon a sea of data emerging for impact investing, and there is so much research, reports, ratings. Question is whether there have been efforts among the leaders like yourselves to streamline, standardize, as well as to publicize the results.
For impact investing specifically, who wants to take a stab at that?
Sure. So we, at B-Lab with the B Impact Assessment, we are trying to leverage kind of existing standards and metrics within the impact space. So we use the GIIRS, the Impact Reporting and Investment Standards, which is a taxonomy or a dictionary of impact metrics and terminology. GIIRS sits within the GIIN, which is the Global Impact Investing Network. So we're trying to kind of leverage those standards, as well as when there are kind of industry-specific bodies, the Social Performance Task Force and their universal standards within microfinance. We're integrating those into our framework. And in terms of streamlining, we update our standards on a 2-year cycle. So we actually right now are in the process of putting together the version 4 of our standards, which we'll be testing later this fall. And one of the pieces of feedback that we've gotten is to try to shorten the number of questions that we ask. So we are we're in the process of doing that.
One of the things that we try to do at SASB is harmonize with other frameworks. So after we've identified material issues, we'll set specific accounting metrics or quantifiable KPIs for companies to disclose on. And rather than recreating the wheel, we do try to look to other frameworks. Like I know that one of our KPI researcher has a dialogue with a couple of people from B Corp to say, well, what are companies already disclosing on so that it remains cost effective for companies. So that's been a really important consideration just in terms of the harmonization of the different frameworks.
When I say in the ESG field, there is clearly an harmonization of the topics that are considered for doing the analysis. But I would say that the future is more in the development of an auditing system based on a common ground to ensure the quality and reliability of the research, than in harmonizing the research itself, because of course, different companies should have their own secret ingredients.
I can't resist the opportunity to plug Impact Space, which we're trying to build, which is would take advantage of all this kind of work and just bring together all the specific research on a particular company or in a particular sector to sort of be a media layer on top of all this very good data.
I'm William D'Alessandro from Victor House News. My question is, will identifying materiality issues for the financial community risk lack of disclosure of many other issues that are of interest to different stakeholders? I guess I can rephrase that and say, if there are standards for materiality that let's say, the SEC would like to look at. Why would companies then stop disclosing the 60? Wouldn't they stop disclosing the 60 or 70% of the other issues that they've been disclosing about? And in an end, we kind of all lose something in the process.
Right. So I guess one way to think about it is, I think that the 10K and the CSR reports can still continue to coexist. And one way to think about it is that SASB represents the minimum set of standards by which companies would disclose their ESG performance. And the GRI framework would still apply to the maximum set that companies would disclose in the CSR report. But the way it is currently, I think that there are a number of companies that are probably disclosing more right now in their CSR report, but there are many more companies. I think there are almost 13,000 public companies, and a significant proportion of those, somewhere, 95%, are not producing CSR reports. So bringing those other 12,000 companies to at least a minimum disclosure requirement, I think in the end will have a much more positive impact. And those that are reporting in their CSR report can continue to do so. I think it will be important to find congruence between the 10K and the CSR report, because now if companies are calling something material, they need to be a little leery of using kind of the term materiality in their CSR report and their 10K, and they want to make sure that there's congruence, that what's in the 10K is also in the CSR report, and then they can go beyond that in the CSR report. So I think trying to reach those companies that aren't currently disclosing in the CSR report is going to be the big impact. And I forgot to mention that we're releasing our healthcare standards, and those are going to be ready for corporate pilot the week of July 31st. So driving to that question about human capital, you'll be able to see in much more detail, what the disclosure topics are, what the accounting metrics are, and then also we have briefs that'll talk about, what's the sort of pathway to value creation for each of these issues. So that's the week of July 31st.
Jody?
Yeah, I share your concern about the disclosure, because if the disclosure is based on what's material from a financial standpoint, that's not necessarily what's material from a social standpoint. And so if we're only going to disclose, and the requirements of the companies are disclose what's material, what social issues are material financially, I don't think it gets us to where we need to be. I think we need to have a separate view on what's important from a social standpoint and require disclosure on that. And that's when you get into social ratings, should focus on what's important from a social standpoint. What investors or companies choose to do with that information, they want to try to correlate that to financial returns and so on, that's fine. But I think we shouldn't try to mix the financial return with the social return, particularly from a rating and disclosure standpoint.
Three more? Okay. Who's got them? Somebody have the mic? Okay.
Oh, okay. Olga Milanova, MSCI. So, Marisa, I think maybe that's the question for you, but I would be happy to hear the other participants' contribution. I'm really glad that you mentioned the definition of materiality, because working in MSCI research, we've also been struggling with this. So I wanted to ask about the consideration. Do you expect companies to report data where it's not obviously material? And to what extent you consider impact? So over the last months, for example, I've been on so many calls and meetings regarding Bangladesh and the Rana Plaza event. And as you probably know, there was practically no market reaction material on all the larger players, not in the immediate stock price or the financial performance. So obviously there is no materiality on the short term, right? It's really hard to predict the materiality on the longer term, but there is significant impact. Do you still expect companies to report this type of data on the issues where they're not immediately material? And where do you draw a line? Is it material for I don't know, Nike and H&M and Walmart, and is it material for smaller players like Children Play, so Cairo clothing, which are not even that much on the radar?
Right. So this is a great question. So in terms of when we look at the material issues, we're looking at them on an industry level. So in theory, if something's a material issue in that industry, then a company in that industry should disclose. How in practice, every company still needs to do its own materiality assessment. And so they'll still be doing it at that level. They could decide like, hey, even though this is an industry issue, we're unique and this doesn't apply to our company specifically. And I think there we may be suggesting that they need to then state that. So companies potentially could not disclose if it's not material to their company. But ultimately, if it's an industry issue, they should disclose. I guess the other part of the question, so it doesn't matter if you're smaller, bigger, it's sort of at the industry level.
But just to interject, so would a situation like working conditions or safety conditions in a factory in Bangladesh that doesn't move the stock price of any of the companies in the sector, could that somehow escape materiality?
Well, I mean, I think looking at kind of the share price fluctuation after the fact, it would all come out through our research process. I think that would probably be one of the material issues. But basically our process is we go through, we scour first for looking at different evidence of interest. So looking at 10K reports, CSR reports, media news, legal news, shareholder resolutions. What are the issues that have been coming up from a management perspective, a regulatory perspective, sort of in innovation news? And once we look there, we look for evidence of interest. So again, scouring some of those similar documents, but also looking at, how does this impact the revenues, the expenses, the value of the assets, the intangible assets. So in this case, this is going to impact brand value. And I think that while there may not have been a strong reaction to the Bangladesh incident, I think if we look back, we'll probably find lots of examples of where there was an impact. So if that's significant enough, then it kind of hits that. It'll get through that evidence of financial impact filter and be considered a material issue.
I think is this the last one?
No, two more.
Two more, okay.
Okay, this is Dalia Abdelader from Arab African International Bank, Cairo. Well, actually, I worked in financial institutions long enough to realize that the tipping point will never be realized unless you get the ESG factors reflected in balance sheets and profit and loss. So it's not only about material disclosure, materiality disclosure, or rating. It's about fundamentally getting the environmental, the social, and governance factors factored in P&L and balance sheets. So accounting, sustainability accounting, to what extent is there progress in measuring? I mean, if I'm a bank, I'm recording $100 million of profit. Is there a way of saying that 60% of the 100 million is material in terms of dollars and 20% is environmental in terms of my capacity to reduce carbon emissions, or 20% social in my capacity to enrich families or individuals to cross the poverty line? Unless the ESG is part of the profit and loss, we are way beyond ESG. It's always a sauce, not an ingredient of the recipe. So this needs fundamental revolutionary revision of finance. How far or close are we from this accounting-wise? Thank you.